All right, I think we're on.
Okay.
Anybody that's in the live chat, give me a yo, NYC. I see you down there. Give me a yo in there. Yeah, I think we're good. So just say what's up, Taz. Good to see you. So today, so important to talk to everybody to get your guys' opinion. I was a journalism major in college, and telling people's stories is one of my favorite things to do. So we're just going to talk today with my man Greg, and you guys know the deal. We're going to do a
Hello,
little
hello.
interview, and then we're going to do a little bit of a Q&A. What's up, everybody? And so we're going to get going. So Greg, anything you got to say to get our viewers going?
Yeah, so obviously I'm a longtime listener, big time fan of of Sunrise Hoodie, and I've got some other influences out in the Mgtow world. But yeah, I'm certainly excited to be here, at least to give my experiences. And we talked a little bit before we went live, and I think part of what I really wanted to kind of convey is my own real life experiences, and let's say convey a little bit of relatability to everybody else out there, but also real life stories. Let's say out in the dating world, out in the I was married once, professional world and things like that. So people have an idea that this is not just people throwing out theories and people just talking about something. These are real life lived experiences, and then it's kind of like you validate the actual data by the experience, right? It's not just the data's out there, the science is out there, and then you validate it by real life experience, right? You can only do so many things kind of in a lab, so to speak. And then once you go out there and actually test it in the real world, you see the truth to a lot of, well, really all of the Mgtow principles. But so, yeah, I mean, a little bit about my background. I'm in my late 30s. I'm divorced as of, it's officially 2 years. We were separated for about a year before that. It was about a 12-year relationship. And, I want to say, in a certain sense, I'm not, I kind of want to throw this out there as, let's say, a little bit of a disqualifier. I have a good relationship with my mother. I came from a good family. I also, I'm a successful guy. I make a decent amount of money and have had successes in the past, let's say monetarily, and also, even just with my own adventures, being out in places, well traveled. I'm not out of shape, those kinds of things. So I want to throw out the automatic disqualifiers. I'm not gay. So I just want to kind of put those out there, plant a flag where everybody can see it. And then that way, if anybody kind of had the opposite feeling, that maybe I was, somebody who, bounce around from orphanage to orphanage, and that's why I have a bad opinion about abusive moms or anything like that. It's just real life lived experience. So, getting back to, I was married for grand total was about like 7 years. Like I said, it was a 12-year relationship. And I would say that probably even before I was married, there was a large element to me that was, I want to say, let's say, purple pillish mindset, where I still believed a little bit in like some of the white knighting BS back then, but I also kind of didn't see a future in many ways with having kids, getting married. The legal contract behind it, essentially the government being behind your marriage, didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me. And then of course their ability to just interject, in the courtroom, no matter how successful you were, you're going to lose half your crap based on, a girl's whims if she decided to change her mind. So there was always that bit of caution with me. And I honestly do think a little bit of that was, funny because you had, one, it was probably maybe within the last week. I remember you had a particular show. It was about your red pill uncle. And so I do have an uncle like that was never married. He was in his 70s now. And he was kind of able to live a life where, he was able to live a life of his own. I'm not going to say that, he was one of these guys who just amassed millions of dollars, or, I don't know what kind of wealth he has. I don't really care. But ultimately he seemed to live a very happy and content life. Not having to, the goals and dreams he had were his own. He wasn't trying to fulfill the goals and dreams of somebody else. And even my dad, to a certain extent. I mean, I'm first generation American. My dad wasn't born here. But he got married late in life. Actually, he was same age as I am now, and my parents were 15 years apart. But some of the things that he used to tell me early on, of course, it was hard for me to digest, because I was thinking to myself, is this, just growing up in that era, during the 80s, you listen to a lot of this kind of stuff about the male chauvinist pig and these kinds of things. So that does get embedded into your psyche just a little bit. But I listened to my dad, and I think, okay, is he just being the proverbial, kind of boater who, who's just thinks males ahead of the household and these kinds of things. But then once you go through things and you realize, that's actually the natural order of things. And we've just been, as guys like Miss Andrea today would say, we've really lost the war on that thing. And then Mgtow is the natural response. It's saying, okay, fine. We're not even playing in the same battlefield anymore. There is no battlefield. You guys won. It's cool. You wanted the win. You take the victory. We're cool. We're going to do our own thing now. So, getting onto that, I ended up getting married. Actually, I was just about 30 years old, and even I probably would have to admit that I did have some doubts even then, just by the idea of marriage. And during my divorce, one of the things that I always, let's say I was very cautious, because I had a large amount of assets. I'd worked a pretty lucrative job overseas for a number of years, and I did protect my assets by, never putting your name on things, never commingling certain accounts. We just had like a joint checking account. So. Not that I would ever encourage anybody to say, hey, go get married and do what I did. I would just say to stay away from it entirely, because I think financially speaking, I would still be way better off, to have the money back from the ring and those kinds of things too. But ultimately, the reason I say that is because my finances were pretty well intact by the time, we did actually get divorced. So I wasn't completely destroyed by a divorce. So it's another thing, maybe to pile on, a little bit about my personality. It's not like I'm one of these guys who, unfortunately, and I see so many of these guys, and your heart goes out to them, because you see how badly, they get divorce raped. And, I didn't necessarily have that happen to me. Do I think that I, probably relinquished more than she deserved? Yeah, absolutely. But I also don't think that, it could have been much worse, given a number of different circumstances, and never having kids was certainly a major player in that too. So, prior to my wife, and then afterwards, I really kind of plunged into the dating scene. So there was any number of media that I went by. Just some of the traditional, just walking up to a girl and talking to her, meeting her in a bar, through friends, through dating apps. There were a couple different ways that I went about doing things. So I'd say that I had a pretty broad spectrum of let's say subjects, if you want to say it that way, at least for the purposes of the call, to pick from, and also to kind of like, there's sort of a colorful array, different girls, but all kind of the same when it boils down to it. And what I want to do is sort of relate some personal experiences, and I hope that it resonates with people to see some of the actual, let's say, things that we talk about, within gynocentrism. Obviously, hypergamy, The a lot of the double standards, and I think a lot of the people that are in the Mgtow community, or at least if you want to say overall, in the broader spectrum of red pill, is this idea that what we've been raised on and what we've been led to believe, and still get inundated with, about women are sugar and spice and everything nice, and then we see that it's not
Yeah.
nearly the case. Um, so let me, I guess, kind of move on.
Well, let me start just to give everyone a
Sure.
background on you. I know obviously a lot of us when we get into relationships, in your case when you got married, you still were wary of where things were going.
Mhm.
What would you say kind of was that turning point where it was like, all right, I found Mgtow. Whether it was someone that you heard speak about Mgtow, whether it was a certain life experience, what was kind of that catalyst for you?
Yeah, so interesting you asked that. I'd say that the one, I don't know if it was my first Mgtow video, but it went as far as Mgtow opening up, it was after divorce. Um, I'm not exactly sure um, how I want to say that I stumbled across it, but I will say that the video that hit it off for me, and one of the big influences that I have is Human, and he's a provider from Australia. I really like a lot of his content. I encourage people to listen to it because he comes from a very rational standpoint. Um, in his viewpoint, one of the crux of his views is he wants to hold women accountable for their actions. In the video that he had was called "Older Women: The Expired Lottery Tickets." So, essentially what this was is, you have a lot of these women that don't understand anything about, well, they understand sexual market value as it applies to a man. They just don't understand it as it's applicable to a woman. They seem to think that the party is going to go on forever for them, especially when they watch these, shows like Sex and the City, or these women that go on in their 40s and 50s and just have these fabulous lives being single, and that's not the reality that you're going to see out there. You're going to see a couple women, kind of fake it till they make it, and hit up the bars, and they essentially just look and act, and they are out of place, acting silly like that. And of course, there are guys out there that'll sleep with them, but they don't seem to have any long-term fulfillment. And then there's a lot of them also, of course, in my age group, their late 30s, when their biological clock is ticking, and they stand around completely bewildered as to why guys are weary of them. And of course, baby rabies are a real thing. And they're very they seem to be completely perplexed as to why the formula of kind of chewing guys up and spitting them up in their 20s didn't really pan out for them the way that they thought that they would. And there seems to be an increasing amount of that. And of course, I think as more men go Mgtow, or at least consciously or unconsciously, as they start to go Mgtow, I think I don't know if there's a wake up. I don't really care.
Mhm.
I think to try to go and reverse all these laws and cultural norms. I don't know if the MRAs still want to go at it. I appreciate what they're doing, but yeah. So when you say the turning point, and sorry, I tend to go off on a little bit of a tangent, but yeah, his video, the older women, the expired lottery tickets, was really the one that was the catalyst. That was the one that really got me hooked.
Okay.
And so I started listening to a few other content providers. Mgtow 101 was really funny. So I saw a lot of the guys from Australia, and I'm thinking, geez, Australia must be a cesspool, because I hear a
Yeah.
lot of things in the news
Yeah.
about it. And then I started listening to like TFM, Sandman too I like, and then of course you, which I looked at as um, certainly being the cool thing is because I know you're younger than me and you're a young guy, and that's definitely a good voice is what is to what we need right now in the Mgtow community is not just like I said, getting back to the idea of relatability. It's not just guys like in their 40s and 50s, and then the guys are pissed off, and everybody, when I say that, I say that, a little bit with a grain of salt, because some of these guys obviously have rational viewpoints and are smart and have been living this lifestyle their whole lives. I'm just saying is that the general consensus is that, or at least the social view, the shaming portion of it is going to
Yeah.
be that people say that, oh, they're just bitter and pissed off. But with the younger guys coming into the community, they have the ability to really mold the perception differently, or at least when I say mold the perception, I don't really care what the outsiders think, because people are just going to the people that are not going to like Mgtow are not going to like it. But the people that are going to be, that are contemplating it, that are on the fence, or really are, really are attracted to the red pill. They're the ones who are, they're the ones who we need, I guess, to fortify things a little more.
So all right. So obviously that is very much a perspective of Mgtow. It's the neck bearded, eating Lucky Charms in the basement type of guy.
Right.
Is when you first came to Mgtow, were you kind of wary about that being the case, and were you hoping it wasn't the case, or did your opinion quickly change based on different people you found?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'd say that it's a little bit of a yes and no. I think I'd like to think of myself as pretty individualistic. But of course, I certainly, my own life probably yielded to some of the pressures of the social world, in a sense that I got married even though there was this voice in my head telling me not to. And I know there's always that line that you quote from Fight Club, where Tyler Durden's sitting in the bathtub and talks
Right.
about, is another woman really what we need? Yeah, I think that does add a little bit of, for lack of a better term, muscle to the movement, in the sense that, yeah, it's like you said, it's not a guy just who lives on a steady diet of Cheez-Its and Lucky Charms in his mom's basement. There's guys in there that are successful. So yeah, I think that's helpful. I think I probably wouldn't be as much into, let's say, um, if you want to say Mgtow in all capital letters, I'd probably be Mgtow in lowercase letters, in a sense that it would still be my worldview. It'd still be what I think. I probably just wouldn't be listening to a lot of content from it if that were the case of the providers. So I would just say that, yeah, it did make me uh, certainly happy that there were guys out there that,
Yeah.
were, um, we're just normal everyday guys, and
Yeah.
good guys that were out there. And that's the encouraging thing, because, really, honestly, you may have a similar worldview as somebody on one particular subject. But then of course it's hard to align yourself with them on so many other things, like, because they might be batshit crazy. But in this case, it's cool because you actually have people that are relatable, people that could be, uh, some people that you could honestly see yourself having a conversation with outside of Mgtow. And I think that's important, because self improvement and those kinds of things are really, I think, vastly important, because it can't just be all about men going their own way, in a sense of just going away from women. That honestly should be almost in the background. When they say
I
going
agree.
their own
Yeah,
way, they're
I
working
agree.
towards something, not away from it.
Just hit puberty. Sorry. Go ahead. um,
So, I'm sorry, but yeah, that pretty well sums it up, I think.
yes. So, and when you came across MGTOW at first, what was it really that really kept you listening to content? Because I know for me, I was 22 when I first heard I'm trying to remember if it was M Crafts or a Sandman, or it might have been Jerry Lou, one of those
Mhm.
guys. I first came across it and I was like, this is very therapeutic. This is exactly how I'm thinking. And from there, it kind of has a different impact once you kind of get past that therapy stage. But for you initially, and then for you now, what would you say that MGTOW content does for you?
Um, so yeah, I think for as far as the MGTOW content, what it does for me. Um, there's, well, for starters, yeah. So maybe if I go back on my last statement and saying working towards something rather than, um, moving away from something, it's kind of it's a mindset to a certain extent. But I think there has to be a balance. I mean, there certainly has to be, like when you listen to some stuff from TFM, for example, he'll talk about things like Bitcoin, or he'll talk about things that are just like economically driven, or you listen to different providers, and they'll have let's say useful or at least thoughtful discussions about other subjects, right? Do I and I also think that at the same time too, it is important to throw in some of those reminders of gynocentrism, and how it's, because those things are relevant, in a sense that, yeah, I don't want to sit here and just keep bitching about gynocentrism and women, but at the same time too, it's important to understand things that are in the news, for example, about some of these crazy sexual harassment cases, and 20 years later you've got Rose McGowan coming out and saying something about
Hmm.
Harvey Weinstein, like trying to stay relevant. I think those things are important because, a lot of us are in the workforce. I mean, I don't think there's too many guys out here just sitting there, counting their hundreds, sitting back and doing nothing and, saying F the world. I think, we've got a lot of people who are in the workforce, have their own businesses, and those things are relevant to at least have an awareness of. So, yeah, I think it's important. And it's also too, kind of as just a general reminder. I go back on certain videos. I look at it like reading a book. There's times that you miss something the first time out. So I go back and I listen to some of those things. Like I told you, there's my original influence was Human, and the older woman, the expired lottery tickets. So I'll go back and listen to some of his videos. I'll go back and listen to some of yours, just because I feel like you kind of have to get back to the basics too. Um, so yeah, I'd say that it's a good mix. I think moving forward, hopefully, I don't know what the percentage split would be, but I think that there's going to be a little bit more of self improvement, and just thoughtful discussions about other topics outside of
Hmm.
some of the gynocentric centered stuff. But I still think that stuff will always be relevant because it's sort of the root cause, or the of where the movement started, and I don't think you don't want to diverge too far away from that.
What for you, day to day right now, how many years out have you, has it been since you first came across Mgtow, I guess, is a question I'd get at first here.
Yeah, so for me, I'm kind of I'm still kind of a rookie. I feel very strongly about the topic, but uh, I'm gonna say, so yeah, 2 years divorced. It was probably, I'd say probably, so it's only probably been for me like a year and a half, truthfully. There's probably some of the principles that I've always thought about, but as far as like, more of a formal thing, or at least just coming across Mgtow itself, it's actually probably been a pretty short time, relatively speaking. So, I'm, and so, but this isn't something that I say, oh, it's a short time, relatively speaking. And, I think it's important to distinguish when they say, some people say men are on strike, and that's not where I'm at, because people still keep on telling me, people who know me, they'll be like, oh yeah, you'll be back. You'll be married in another year. You'll be
Right.
married to somebody else in another couple of years. And I'm like, okay, you just don't get it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's such a typical shaming line that um I definitely I think every person that comes to MGTOW at some point, especially if they've had a blue pill a path at some point, so to speak, and I think that many of us have. I know I have. You're, a friend that you make that comment to is going to be like, you'll be back soon. You really can't live, that life on your own. But the thing I've realized is the difficulty in creating a shared understanding about um, any bigger idea, obviously, without there being tangible experience. And that's, if that doesn't happen, then it's going to be more difficult to reach that person.
Right.
During your marriage, what was were you kind of on eggshells? Did you kind of like have these thoughts in your mind, these red pill thoughts? What kind of was your psyche at that point?
Yeah, I think, ultimately what, so in the back of my mind, in, and also keep in mind that, let's say my ex-wife, came from a good family, and I kind of want to throw that in there too, because in a sense, there's always the other case where people will go, like I'd say, when I say that I've got a pretty broad spectrum of, like women that I've dated, or obviously one that I married. When I say that, is that she came from a good family, was raised in a good area, went to college, these kinds of things, uh, wasn't a former stripper, a druggie, or any of those kinds of things. I think what happened was, probably, um, let's say during my marriage, I just, came to a realization that, let's say there were probably, like I always described it as death by a thousand cuts. But you look at those kinds of things of, let's say, the sacrifices that everybody's, has to make, and more times than not, yeah, and you hear a lot of these guys say this jokingly, and sometimes you hear it from like old, some of the older guys, is you're about to get married, and some of these guys, you, you don't know how much of this is really all that, kind of tongue-in-cheek humor, is as much as it is sort of them trying to laugh off, a little bit of pain when they say, like there's the guys down in the ditch calling you all in, like, hey, join us down here, it's great. Or all these guys say, hey, just remember, happy wife, happy life.
Right.
And and always looked at things like, well, wait a second, if the objective of my life is supposed to be solely to be in servitude to somebody else just to make them happy, and here I am, and I have to bust my ass. And I was always an understanding husband. She worked for a company and they went out of business, and I was like, hey, listen, you pursue whatever you want. Well, our finances are in order. We'll, I'll do, don't worry about those things. Don't stress about it, whatever. I was always there. And then I realized, on the flip side, when certain things would get tough for me, and these were my experiences in the dating world before, that you had to have this impenetrable armor as a man.
Right.
And then, the minute you showed, any sign of weakness to it, it was like all of a sudden, that invulnerability, then trying to earn that back, was tenfold. And so, I saw a lot of those kinds of things where, um, I was being the understanding husband. I was doing those things. I was participating in the things that she wanted to, because I felt like the right thing to do is to be supportive. And then you realize the general lack of reciprocation. I mean, even when I think to myself, and I've said this to people now, when you look at the wedding ring and you say, okay, well, why should I be the one to save up? And now, of course, these figures are just ridiculous when you say, I think, what is it? I think it's, of course, it's the diamond industry pushing this crap, but they say 3 months salary or something like that for an engagement ring. Well, if you're going to put forth the engagement ring, and the women are working and they have college degrees, and in many cases now, like in your age group, they're making more than the men do.
Yeah.
Why is
Or
it
they're
that the man has
graduating
to
more.
save up for
Yeah.
this? Why would the man have to save up for these kinds of things? So I just saw a lot of these, um, a lot of this inequality, and then just how it played out in the marriage. And I took a big risk because her dad is an attorney. Um, and so I just decided, you know what, to hell with it. Like, I've got the rest of my life to live for. And at any given time, she can just decide to, just kind of, walk away from it too. But it's
So
just going to put us in the same position.
so did that emerge, like, was there an abrupt moment that, this thought, this fear actually crystallized? And since realizing that, how has, you know, since moving on from your marriage, whatever, how has Mgtow benefited you in this time?
So, for nothing else, how it's benefited me, if I jump ahead a little bit,
Mhm.
well, let's say, is the moment crystallizing, you're saying, as it was in my divorce, like to
Yeah.
split. So yeah, actually there was a discussion she and I had. She said she wanted to talk to me, and then she came to me and said, and there were always times, intermittently, like if she was unhappy about something, one of the things I would always ask her is it anything to do with me? Because if it's something, let's talk about it. If it's something to do with me, let's talk. And I always wanted to give that option. And this time she actually came to me and she says, and I'm not happy. And of course, at this point in the very beginning, I was I would say I'm a giving person, but I'm not. Um, my self esteem isn't so low that I'm not gonna, um, you know, like some people, who will just
They'll
grovel at
buckle.
somebody's
Yeah.
feet.
They'll buckle for
A-
attention. Hmm.
And so me, I was like, okay, well, let's do whatever we can to say this. You want to go to counseling? You want to do this? You want to do this? You want to do this? And it was like, well, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. And I was like, okay, well, if that's the attitude you're going to take, then I've thrown out of the options. Um, and, I'm going to wait for you because you were the one who brought it up. So, and of course, I talked to a couple of female friends and they were like, well, a lot of women, they want to be fought for. And I'm
Yeah,
thinking
that's
like,
a
well,
screwed up way of
yeah.
thinking, but it's true.
And I'm thinking, well, if that's the case, I mean, on the flip side, I can sit here and say, well, a lot of men want certain things out of their wife, let's say in the bedroom, or for them to
Hmm.
to compete with other women on that stage. But you obviously know that there's there's things that hold us back from doing those things. Just so I said, well, this is just kind of goofy. Want to be fought for? Like, I think I've done enough, to prove. So I kind of had this attitude. I want to say it was almost like a microcosm of Mgtow, where I sort of walked away and I was like, hey,
Yeah.
listen, if I'll tell you what, she proposed an idea of maybe of us splitting up for like a week. And she proposed the idea of me going back and, living with my mom or something like that, and her going back to and her staying in our place. And I thought about it for a minute and I said, I tell you what, your parents live close by. Your parents live closer to your work. My mom is about 20 miles out of my work. I said, if you want somebody to leave, you leave.
Yeah.
So she kind of looked a little shocked, but she actually decided to leave. She went back to her parents. And then a
Hmm.
week became a month. And then, became 2 months. And then there was, kind of a blowout that we had. And I just decided, okay, I've been prolonging this a little bit too long, and I went and talked to an attorney. And then, unbeknownst to me, she had been talking to an attorney as well. Um, so I think at that point, yeah, I'd say that the moment that crystallized was really just when I felt like, okay, you know what, I gave it my all, and now I have nothing else left to give. I'm not, and I'm not going to get to the point of being pathetic. That's just not me. So fast forward a little bit, and I think the second part of your question was, how does MGTOW influence my life now?
Yeah. What
Um,
what are the benefits that you're seeing? Yeah.
well, I mean, if nothing else, it's just understanding that say like like I get it, like women are not a goal. They're just part of the scenery. They're there. And not to say that I don't have any women in my life as far as, like the occasional dates and things like that. I just look at it like as far as self-preservation and, I came from a point, let's say even in my late teens, early 20s, there was a good period of time where I was all about, I don't want to say all about myself to make it look like I was, uh, you know, completely in solitude, but I was much more about, um, bettering myself. And then I realized, okay, where did all that go? There was so much of that time that was kind of wasted. And so, so now I can refocus myself, on personal improvement. I was never I always stayed fit. I was always going to the gym and doing those kinds of things. And interestingly enough, to kind of tie that in, I know that there's been times where you've mentioned on some of your shows that for example, sleep being important, going to the
Yeah.
gym betting on yourself, and a lot of times the women trying to gravitate you away from those kinds of things. And that was one thing I never waved the white flag on, because my ex-wife would say things like, you need to go to the gym less. And I said, listen, I go 4 to 5 times a week. I go for about an hour at a time. Why don't you go with me? She's like, well, I think you go too much. And I go, well, this is how you met me when I was married, or when I was single, and this is how I'm going to stay. I was definitely unbending in that view, because it was part of me. It was part of my lifestyle. And I'm glad that I never capitulated to that, and decided to say, like, oh, okay, well, hey, let's just go out to eat a few more times. Let me drop my gym membership. Let me do a few push-ups one day a week, and
Yeah.
then call it a day.
Like, she's
Um,
gone to bed now. I can, all right, let's see what I can do. I got an ab roller in here. I can do that, and I can do some push-ups real quick. Cool. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that wasn't it. Like, I wasn't going to just say, hey, let me squeeze it in for these 15 minutes. Yeah. And fall asleep while I'm doing it. Yeah, because that was but it's interestingly enough, when you have mentioned some of these things, it's interesting how the female mindset is to gravitate the man away from sort of a lot of these healthier exploits. They seem to want to go to the gym when they're there trying to attract a man.
Right.
A
It's
man
a
is there to,
transient
like,
goal. Yeah.
right,
Mhm.
exactly. It's the gym is just a scene. It's just a social scene, and they're there going through the motions. Whereas there's guys who are out there, really. I mean, of course, you're going to find a few juiced up CrossFit chicks who might be there,
Yes.
trying to get stronger or whatever. But that's that I don't think that's, generally speaking, what a guy's looking for. But but yeah, a lot of these types of exploits, if they don't see, I think, perhaps a monetary value in it, they're not really concerned with you doing it. It doesn't matter that if it makes you happy, if it makes you healthy. um they'll complain about it when you're not, and if a guy gets out of shape, then they'll be pissed off,
Right.
and they'll say the guy's too fat, when they're cheating on him with somebody else.
Right.
But
This Sorry to interject there. No, I was the thought it just brought to my attention there is the thing that I've noticed, and you make a good point about, does it bring a monetary value? So if you are, like, in this situation, if you are a trainer or you work in a field where you're required to work on your body, or you're an athlete or something, those are like the times that these things are protected in their eyes, and that they accept, and that they'll allow you to invest time into. But if it's something, an independent goal, that means, especially with a lot of women that have developed control issues throughout their life, the more that you invest in those individual hobbies, the more it means that they're losing control in their eyes. And so it's like you almost have to be that CrossFit trainer or something, or that be your career at that point.
right, at least if they're going to be outwardly supportive of it. And of course, this also has to do with, and you and I kicked around a little bit on email, was, sort of the short-sightedness, in a sense where, a guy can have, let's say, a savings of 250 grand. And, he can buy a girl a $5,000 engagement ring, for example. Another guy can put himself into $20,000 debt by buying the woman a $20,000 engagement ring, and the same woman would be more impressed with the $20,000 engagement ring, because that's what the outward, it doesn't matter, it's what the outwardly appearance is the appearance of having, wealth. That's why a lot of people, I think, got into a lot of, the mortgage troubles that they did. Most men kind of live for contentment, and I think a lot of men, could live in a small, a small house, or whatever it is that they want. I mean,
Mhm.
it's whatever it is that's manageable for them. But I think this sort of like widespread sort of McMansion mentality, I think, was certainly bred, and really pushed by kind of the gynocentric mindset. And these guys who are just probably, um, damaging their health, working long hours, busting their ass, so they can buy these houses. And of course,
for their wives to get bored of them and later divorce them, when they think they can just do better. Um, so, so yeah, I think it's the image of those kinds of things that's more impressive. So if, if a guy like I said, if a guy goes out and buys, if a guy has a savings, that's not what other people can see, and that's not what seems to be important.
Right.
It's the $20,000 ring that's important, no matter if the guy got himself into debt and has to work a second or a third job to pay it off. That's what's important.
Yeah, no, it's 100% true. And this brings into focus kind of this idea of when you go to the store to buy something, when they're buying a new pair of shoes, or you're buying that ring or whatever it is, or you purchase something for Christmas or their birthday, they don't have that thing that you're buying for them at the moment, and so it's not really ultimately 2 months down the road that they're going to be interested in the utility of the product. They're interested in that feeling that the idea gives them, and that
Mm-hmm.
feeling is an idea that is momentary, and that's fleeting. And so it is that idea. And it'll even go down with something that can be as expensive. If you buy them a $30,000 jet ski, it doesn't matter what the price is, it's going to be almost treated the same as a pack of gum, because it's the idea that's focused on. Whereas the man, he's always going to buy it for utility. Usually, I mean, sure, I'm not saying I've never purchased something because it made perfect sense economically, but that's a great
Sure.
point. Yeah, go on. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this is, even I can kind of relate it to like even personal discussions that I've had. I was dating a girl who, and of course, I can just hear, a few of the boos when I say, she was a single mom. So I was like, okay, well, at one point I was getting to this point where like, okay, a lot of these women that are out there, my age at least, probably have kids. So I thought, okay, well, let me try this and see what it's like. And I dated a single mom, and I remember having this discussion because I was never afraid to ask questions. What's interesting is when women have no problem with asking a guy, hey, what do you do, and those kind of things, and all those questions are, what do you do, or oh yeah, and they're a little bit more slick about it sometimes about asking the questions, but they want to know essentially what it is like. um how much money do you make? um
Right.
and and I actually had that happen to me one time at a doctor's office. I remember I asked a girl out, and she was definitely attracted. And then the next thing I know, I see on my LinkedIn profile, she had, and I never told her my last name, but she obviously went to my file, and she looked me up on LinkedIn, probably to see, and from what I understood, I ended up talking to one of the other girls at the office. She was in a serious relationship with a guy for like about 7, 8 years, very into herself. She said the guy drove and I drive a very nice car too.
Probably
Um,
narcissistic tendencies, I'm guessing.
Absolutely, absolutely. So she checks my LinkedIn, and I'm like, wait a second, So I see this thing on LinkedIn, and she, actually, this was after the point I gave her my number, she gave me hers, and I said, okay, well, whenever you have the time, you call me, because she was, kind of like, well, I'm very busy. And I said, okay, well, hey, whatever. And I kind of just left it alone. Well, I found out from one of the other girls she had been dating somebody else, or had been living with somebody else. She later texted me while she was out of town. Who knows if she had a fight with her boyfriend or whatever the case was, and said, hey, I'm in New York. I'm at this makeup show or makeup and hair show. I'll I'll give you a call when I get back. I said, hey, cool, whatever. And then I see that she checked my LinkedIn profile. And so I waited a little bit, and I thought, okay, well, once I knew she was shady, I didn't really care. I just figured I'd call her out and kind of pull her punk card on it. So I took a screenshot of the LinkedIn thing anyway, just to make sure that I had validation for it, in case anybody, so in case she tried to deny it. But I actually sent her a text, and I said, listen, if you ever wanted to know how much money I make, you didn't have to check my LinkedIn. You could have just asked me.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. They can't even realize that about a LinkedIn profile.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like you could have set it to private, but if you didn't think that, and of course, there's a lot of guys out there who just think, okay, well, I better not say anything. And I just look at it like, hey, there's a million women out there. I'm certainly not worried about one and what she has to say about me. I know what my opinion is about her now, and that's all that matters. So getting back to the single mom that I dated, we talked about this idea, and she was also belonged to one of these mega churches that's in my area. So you think of the idea of the I know you had a show about the church girl, and she kind of put this whole thing out there about she's definitely into church, and I would say that it was always a part of many a conversation. So I asked her honestly, one day about, she never finished college, but I asked her about things like, we just talked about finances, and she told me that she had, student loan debt. And I said, well, you never finished college. You're my age. You're in your late 30s. And like, how did that happen? She's like, well, when I was with my ex, and she was never married, that was something he was supposed to pay. And I was like, well, why was it something he was supposed to pay? She goes, well, I was at home raising my daughter. And I said, well, it doesn't mean you couldn't have got a part-time job just to, accelerate that. I said, by now,
right. There's so many ways to get a degree with.
Yeah, I said those student loans have just done nothing but gain interest. I mean, and if nothing else, they would have just put more of a burden on your ex. So why would you, if you put the burden on your ex, it means that it puts burden on the both of you. And now you're left, because you never paid it off. So now you're left with a bigger burden. And she says, well, it sounds to me like you're putting a price on love. And I said, well, to that, I would ask you, would you accept, what kind of a ring would you accept? I said, would you accept a gold band? And she goes, no, I want a diamond. And I said, well, my parents were married for 40 years before my dad passed away. I said, and they never had diamond rings. She says, well, it's tradition. And I said, well, if that's tradition, I said, if you got married, would your dad pay for the wedding? And she goes, probably not. And I go, so where's the tradition? I said, your tradition of having a ring is only like 2 generations old.
It truthfully
the tradition
is.
of the tradition of the
consumers, marketing.
Yeah, the tradition of the father of the bride paying for the wedding is much older.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was supposed
to be.
They're
not going to have that insider knowledge, so to speak. Yeah.
Well, right. I mean, but it's weird. It's like when you say it's insider knowledge. I mean, it's kind of like it's just something that got easily forgotten, right? I mean, it wasn't anything that exactly. It just kind of just went away. You know what I mean? Like, hey, wait a second, where did that happen? Like, how did that happen? Oh, well, I don't know. We just stopped talking about it.
That's the thing I've seen in so many disagreements that I've had in the past with people. Maybe my ex-girlfriends, for example. It's having a misunderstanding and they don't value the why behind things. The why is a question you always ask, and even for something as seemingly as minuscule, in the grand scheme of the world, as buying a ring, which just understand the why and your perspective will change, right? But no, it still won't for them.
Yeah, that's I mean, it's a very concise way of putting it, that they just don't understand the why. And it's funny because I had this conversation with a couple of coworkers, and they said, and I'm a pretty laid back guy, but obviously I just don't, I've just never been one to really kind of put up with BS. And so they said, and I've heard this from a few different women, even friends of mine, and they said, you think too much. And I said, well, sometimes I think women don't think at all or think enough. I said, I'd rather have somebody who thinks too much that doesn't think at all. And I don't, it's not that I'm a spontaneous person and those kinds of things, but if I have to, but, and I think Human said this, and I don't know that I think he even said that it was a quote from somewhere else. But if you want to know who rules over you, look at the people that you can't criticize. And it seems like, that's certainly where we're at. We're at the point where you can't criticize, you can't challenge any of these traditions. Just like, or not traditions, but I would say newfound traditions or newfound dogmas that you have. Same thing is with, and I've been posed this by, women in their 30s, where they say things like, yeah, now I understand, like, maybe I should have a man take care of me. And I'd say, like, well, why would a man take care of you? And they say, well, it worked pretty well for my parents. And I'd say, and my answer to that is, I said, well, for starters, I mean, your mom probably, to get a little vulgar, I said, your mom probably didn't have a mile of dick run through her either. Or she didn't come into
Yeah,
she didn't come into the equation with a bunch of debt or asking for some crazy
exactly.
diamond ring. I go, so if so, let's not just cherry pick the things that we want.
That's the case. It's a pick and choose. It's just smorgasbord. It's a buffet these days. It's just appalling. Yeah.
Right. It's the sort of cafeteria style of relationships where it's like, okay, well, I like this tradition, I don't like this, and I understand if those things go through sort of a process of sort of like cultural deletion, if you will, if that makes sense. Over time, sometimes people do things, but sometimes people do things that are crazy, self-destructive traditions. They don't make them good just because they're tradition. I mean, there was some, there was uh, like tribes in Papua New Guinea that used to eat the brains of people, all their elders, because they thought they'd gain their knowledge. And of course, it was giving them, prion disease and like basically like mad cow. It was a tradition that they carried on, but, was killing them early at a young age. It doesn't mean a tradition, is a good thing. So the idea that saying tradition is sort of supersedes any kind of rationale.
Right.
Unfortunately, sometimes it does. It doesn't mean it's good though. And I think we live in a society where we have, just such a wealth of information at our fingertips. It can certainly be destructive, but I think, getting back to some of our earlier topics about Mgtow is that, there's so much out there. I think, especially for men, there's so much out there that just goes beyond, trying to pick up women and trying to figure women out. It's like, you get to a point, I think, and I think this is where, if you're really into Mgtow, it's like, trying to figure out women, trying to figure, okay, it's an interesting background topic. It like I said, it certainly has to be there. And it certainly has to stay relevant because men have to be reminded of it. But there's so much out there just for self-improvement that you get to the point where you go, okay, well, like, who gives a shit? Like, if a girl's giving me a shit test, like, I don't care. Like,
Yeah.
whatever. Who cares if, that's so not a goal anymore.
Right.
There's so many other things that you can move towards, rather than just away from.
Right. I mean, and that's the thing that I don't think that a lot of people end up getting, especially into certain relationships, because of this scarcity and abundance principle, and as well, and it also relates to areas of self-improvement. And we have this idea that there truly is a scarcity of partners. There's a scarcity of ways to improve your life, to make money, to help pay off debts, to save money. And as a result, you end up settling for what's local. You end up settling for choices in relationships that are really not going to benefit you, but benefit the fact of fitting in society by having a partner, maybe, or by
Mm-hmm.
just having someone around. And also, you do that with a lot of times with just ways to improve your life. And I have this feeling that sometimes people just don't do things, like they just don't realize that there are things that you can do, and
Sure.
yeah, and as a result, then sometimes you're just you settle for these relationships. I know I have, and you settle for jobs, and you get in situations where you're trying to repeal from them. And I know that some men have come to Mgtow through that. Not necessarily just with women, just with life, with that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, a lot of people just kind of go on autopilot. They're
Mhm.
very much, they just sort of settle into that groove. And I guess, and this gets back to that blue pill, red pill analogy, is that, there's some people that want to be, that want their eyes open to the world. They want to see what's going on, even if some of those things are inconvenient to them, that they realize, Yeah, some of this stuff, some of the things that I've been taught are shitty, and they're not good for me. And I know that I'm going to have to endure some criticism for it. Um, and there's, and there's some people who just say, um, and I can't remember the character's name from The Matrix when he's like eating the steak and he says, yeah, I know this steak isn't real, but essentially it tastes so good, I don't really care. And I kind of look at that with a lot of these guys, where they just kind of go throughout it and they're just like, hey, whatever, but I think unfortunately there's, especially for men, because the male brain tends to be that of a problem solver. I don't think that these guys can't, completely not question it. And of course, in some cases, they have to come face to face with a catastrophic event because they just get they just get their asses kicked in court and they lose everything. And then, of course, that's what you don't want to have happen. And I think that's part of the message of Mgtow too, is that like, it's good for a guy like you who's young to be putting these messages out there too, because you're giving these guys a ray of hope to say you don't have to do this. And not only do you not have to do this, there's such a better option.
Right.
It'll be good for you. Don't so that's why you kind of have a myriad of different content providers that of guys who have virtually lost everything in court. Yeah, and then you have other guys who are like yourself, who are young, and then you have guys like me that are kind of in the in between. Is that you have to have people out there that you see it's such a kind of a broad spectrum of people. So yeah, there's just that. I guess what I'm trying to say is, it's good to have the younger people out there too, getting that message across, because then a lot of these people don't have to face that. They don't have to get this swift realization. It's kind of like putting out a bunch of drunk driving commercials, because hopefully you're going to deter some people from drunk driving and losing their whole life by either getting caught or, of course, unfortunately, like you getting into an awful accident. You're putting people out there and saying, okay, these are the awful realities of it. Whether or not it's affected me personally or not, here's just the truth, and it sucks, but it sucks at first. It sucks at first to kind of, the red pill tastes shitty when you first taste it, but then you realize, okay, yeah, but it's opened up a whole new world of things that are just, so not possible if you don't go that route.
Right. Yeah, and that that's the thing that I kind of I went into making content in June. I kind of did it sporadically for a while, but I was like, it's something that I've thought even 13, 14, 15, and if I was thinking that in 2007, there's likely guys, I'm not some Albert Einstein over here. There's likely some guys that are thinking the same way as me. And I'm like, I'm gonna take a shot at this and see if that's the case. And you'd be amazed at the number of teens, not just late high school, like middle school, that are coming to email and that are commenting. And I think that that's really positive, because they do have a chance to really prove what Mgtow can benefit, and how it can benefit men, which is making the path easier ultimately, and which is kind of my thesis behind even anything Mgtow related that I talk about. It's like a cheat code. It's kind of like you just like bypass the level a little bit, and you can, and there are other things within it that it naturally promotes, whether it's minimalism, whether it's using your time wisely, and those underpin Mgtow principles, and that's really what got me interested in it. It's amazing to see how this kind of built up over time and how society actually kind of crafted this. So,
well, sure, and also too, I mean, there's always going to be you reference a lot of people, let's say like a Nikola Tesla, as kind of being, potentially like, let's say an early, if you want to call him a pre or proto Mgtow type of a guy. But the great thing is, like you mentioned, is that you've got, teenagers, 14, 15-year-olds, that are actually, let's say, if you want to say it's weird to say it in this way, but officially part of the movement. That the good thing about that is you'll see people starting from the ground level up and seeing their successes and seeing what it could kind of do for you to have that sort of mindset, as opposed to like I said, referencing somebody in history is awesome, and we can definitely you can speculate, I suppose, as to what their worldview was in some cases, but in this case, you can actually get sort of real life. You can get somebody who, I was Mgtow when I was 15, and I never looked back. And then you see them when they're 35, and you go, well, holy shit! Like, yeah, I mean, this clearly is the most beneficial lifestyle, for a man to live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the thing that's cool about history as well, is that we talked about tradition doesn't really verify if something is beneficial always. Looking at when Mgtow kind of expressed itself in major influencers and figures in history, it shows that this is not necessarily a new thought, and I think that it gives it so much more efficacy when you do talk about people like Tesla, you do talk about people like the Wright brothers, you do talk about even some athletes, and then you compare them to some athletes. And the reason I kind of do that, it's not only it's fun for me to talk about those guys and to talk about the guys I'm interested in, but I think it does add to that relatability as well. It's like, oh, Sunrise likes Derrick Rose or something, or like,
Sure.
You used to like Derrick Rose. It's like, I used to watch him on ESPN all the time. Like, Sunrise is just a normal guy, which is, something that I felt was so important, especially with Mgtow, because it's very easy in Mgtow to create this, just kind of almost like phantom image, where it's because we have to be so concerned about our privacy. So, yeah,
certainly, yeah. I mean, there's, and also additionally too, is that you never know. I mean, anybody can be anything online. When I remember there was something like a 2020 thing about like the 20 meanest things done in the 2000s. This was years and years ago, and of course, like 19 of them were done online. So like the anonymity aspect, but at the same time too, the cool thing is about the content providers like yourself is that you put real things out there. It's not just about a bunch of macho bravado and bullshit. It's just what it feels like to me. It's just a real everyday guys, of course, from different walks of life, which we all to a certain extent are, but just talking about, relatable topics and things that'll benefit the male community. And that's one of the cool things. That's definitely one of the driving forces. And one of the things that I'm looking forward to is, let's say, as Mgtow progresses, of course, it was hard. I think it was hard without the online community to a certain extent, at least to get the word out there, or at least to know that there's a community out there. But I also don't think that if, let's say, every Mgtow provider were just somehow censored on the internet, that it would go away either. I think enough men are becoming so much more self-actualized, and realize, independent of that, that they're able to, that they're able to go through it. It would suck, but but again, we're men, we're problem solvers, and we'd figure out another medium
Right,
to get it
exactly.
done.
And that's the thing, and that's the thing about technology too. And it goes back to what we were saying about, people just don't do stuff sometimes. Where it's like now it's you have so many different avenues to constantly, not just learn but to produce and share on different platforms that, it does give a lot of hope for that as well, because you never know what will happen in the future um, as well. But going back to your thought about men becoming self-actualized, I think conversely, on the other side of the token, I listen to Joe Rogan
Mhm.
every once in a while. I listen to Jordan Peterson, and they
Sure.
actually were doing a talk together, and they both really brought up the same thing, that it was like Jordan Peterson was like, "Yo, I give these talks, I I go and give these speeches, and all these guys are showing up, and they're learning about psychology, and they're learning about how to improve their lives and what's going on and why they don't feel like they have a role." And he's like, men don't do this. Like, men normally have not done this. This is normally something a lot of women do, a la the Oprah movement of like the
Sure.
2000s and stuff. And it's like, that makes you think, why is that? And for us, we know, the reasons. We know feminism. We know we're being marginalized. But at the other end, when men embrace that, they're still they're still capable of improving their lives, and that they haven't given up yet, they're going to try to self-actualize, and then they turn to
Mhm.
things like Mgtow. And that's why I think there's almost kind of like a rebirth of that right now.
Yeah, I think I actually saw that with Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson.
Mhm.
And it's funny because some of that paradigm has shifted. I kind of say this in a cautionary way, is that, and the reason I say that is because, people will say, oh, okay, it's probably sort of like a tug of war. Right now women are having their day, and then, men will get it back. And it's probably like this push pull. And I go, no, no, it's not like that. It's just a new paradigm is just going to have to be formed. And men aren't walking away. I mean, there are, some of the guys like in the MRA movement where they're more on strike, but Mgtow isn't about that. It's not about, walking away and going, okay, well, if you guys behave yourself. It's like, no, we've seen the extent of it. The trust has been broken. But I think, yeah, I actually had this discussion over the holidays. I went to like a Christmas brunch with a bunch of people in the neighborhood, and two of the women that were there, um, they said, they were kind of asking me. And now, mind you, and I got to preface this by saying they're both single and divorced with kids, and they made some mention. They were asking me about relationships or something like that, or about women I've met, and I said no. I'm not. As far as like dating goes, I'm not really interested in settling down. I'll date here and there, but I'm not interested in. And they're like, well, that's just because of the women that you pick. Of course, this is like a common shame and lane. And I said, well, I said, let's face it. I said, women have umpteen million more choices than men,
Right.
because they're the ones being pursued, generally speaking. I said, so when you talk about the ones that I pick, I said, keep in mind that some of these have been people that have been set up with through friends. And one of the girls says, well, some of the girls, you have to understand that if they're in their 30s and they're that hot, there must be something wrong with them. And I was like, well, should I date ugly chicks? And the two of them, and I said, and I started pointing out some like, different psychological principles. Cause one of the girls said something about, yeah, I couldn't approach a guy. And I said, well, welcome to a man's world. I said, it's because you're not hardwired to deal with consequences. That's what part of being a woman is. You don't have that part of your brain. You're not hardwired to understand consequences. And men are. And I said, that's why you can't handle rejection. And the two of them were like,
Right.
the two of them looked at each other, they frowned, and they're like, and that's why you're still single. And I said, but I'm not the one pursuing anything. You're the ones on dating sites. You're still single. I
That's
said,
gold.
I go, what are you talking about? And I said, and I said, and I guarantee you, neither one of you have ever looked at a single sociological or psychological study on any of this stuff, have you? And they're like,
Right.
you just answered it in such a Greg kind of way. And I go, well, you know what? I take that as a compliment because I actually do some research. I do some work on my own account. I do read about these things. I don't read one source, I read a broad array of topics, and, the people that have put in the genuine research all point to the same thing. So,
Right. Yeah, that's so true. And once again, it gets back to you're comparing apples and oranges a lot when you are communicating that type of reasoning. It's like, yeah, you're not programmed to view those consequences. It's not like I'm attacking you. I'm pointing out a something that's verifiable. I'm
right,
pointing out something that is actually true. And that's the thing. It's truth now, and not just when you're engaging with women like that, in that context. Like something factual like that is viewed as threatening, as viewed as limiting, where actually it does limit
it,
people because they have nowhere to go, they have nothing to understand or believe, and then they end up freaking out and they end up going in this new age movement type of thing too, even.
yeah, I was actually watching something, and I'm probably going to butcher what he was saying, but it was something like, so Buddy Morris is a very well-known strength and conditioning coach, and I was watching, one of his speeches. He's coached for a number of different NFL teams, college football teams. Really, really knowledgeable guy, extremely well read. And one of the things he was talking about was the science of, let's say, strength training. And he goes, the essentially, you have the science, and then he goes, and then you go through the training to sort of validate the science. So yeah, you have the theory, you have the things that are out there, and then you look at all the biology and you look at all the numbers, and it's like the numbers add up when you actually put it in practice. So that's kind of why I say, I've read a good deal about, psychological principles, like of hypergamy and female nature and those, and male nature for that matter. And then when you actually kind of go out, I want to say, into the field, to use sort of like the pickup artist term, and I use that term reluctantly because that's not my gig, but you marry up those two things, because they definitely coincide. The lab and the real world experience, they add up. So, so it's not as if I'm just saying, this is just my own personal experience and that's it. Not to say that the person's subjective experience isn't important, because it certainly is. But, when you add it up to the actual, like the field studies and the facts and the truth, you really, all you do is you punctuate all that data that's out there.
Right. Right. What did that conversation go any further, or have you had any other
Not
similar
not
conversations?
really, because I got to the point where I was just kind of laughing it off, and I was like, well, I just said, well, I go, wait a second, I said, you're the two that are scouring these dating apps,
Right.
looking for guys, and you're trying to tell me that it's the reason that I'm single. I was like, I'm not the one out there looking for it. So
Right. And
that's the irony in the whole thing, is
that's
that
the
they're
thing.
going to sit here and try to shame me for being single, and it's like, I mean, I want to say, like, thanks, you're right, there is a reason I'm single, because I've chosen to be that way.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, I compare it sometimes to, that classic line, "I think we need to take a break for now," and like, I know you like, you can go on Tinder and whatever and Bumble or whatever and find the girl that you really want to be with right now and see how it is. And it's like, a lot of the time for the guy, when he's leaving, he's like, "That sounds awful. I'm not doing that at all. Like, why are you assuming that I'm on the pursuit?" It's because that's their reality. That's the reality. That's the food that they're hunting for. And it goes back to our biology and surviving. You mentioned that thing about men having to weigh consequence. That's because they were put in situations where life was threatened,
Right.
more frequently, whether it was just procuring food, whether it was in war, whether it was just in work, things that either threatened your life or threatened your ability to earn money. So it's like, it just comes back to what our natures are, and that's
Sure.
one thing that is so hard to communicate. Yeah.
But I think also too, and I think that there's kind of a little bit of a I want to say a little bit of a hedge, a little bit of an addendum that you kind of have to add on to there when you look at when you say, it gets back to our nature. I think I want to say um, I only want to say it seems like it's a more emphatic version because I don't want people to get confused, with sort of like when I say, gynocentrism is feminine nature on steroids. I don't mean
Yeah.
I don't mean anabolic steroids, but so what I mean is, it's a much more emphatic version in a sense where, women did in the past, have some skin in the game as far as like let's say even responsibility, like when it came down to raising kids and those kinds of things. They did have some concept of consequences, not fully, but, they had some concept of it. And I think that the modern society, because women tend to be such group thinkers, and influenced by groupthink. And this is kind of why I wanted to relate it back to even my ex-wife when I say, she was raised in a good household, intact, family and parents and all these other kinds of things. And one of the things that you have to always understand is that, because some guys will always say, yeah, but, if they're out there, as a unicorn hunter, they always look at it like, oh, well, I'll find that one good girl, who's raised in a good family and, has an education and those kinds of things. The one thing that you have to understand is that you're not just married to that one girl. She's going to go to work and she's going to listen to other women, and that's not where it begins and ends. It's not just like she's in the household just listening to you,
Especially
and
today.
she's
Right.
exactly, or she's being inundated with crap on TV, and just complete, almost like modern day smut, like The Bachelor. Where every woman's idea of a first date is, being flown around in a helicopter or, riding on dolphins or something like that. It's always just some real fairy tale bullshit. So, that's the thing that's the thing that you're competing against. And also too, because they've taken away sort of, proven societal, like, I think heard this from TFM not too long ago, where he was talking about how there already are things, when they talk about like something like toxic masculinity, there already are things like in place, to sort of, checks and balances for toxic masculinity, because we obviously know that there are some guys out there that, just have unbridled, they have this, they don't really have any, restraints, let's say. And of course, some of these guys are like the criminals, right? So, what happens is, they get thrown in jail, because they go out and pick fights and things like that. The problem is that for any unhinged female nature, there used to be societal, norms and, sort of like the shaming stuff that worked to keep those things under control.
Right.
To keep them from getting out of control. And that's one thing that's been taken away, is that, especially because, you have, and it almost seems to pattern after the male and female minds, because in the male mind, law, order, those kinds of things are much more on the rational end of things. And of course that's going to, favor the control of the male mind in a sense, or the male, or of bad male behavior. But bad female behavior was controlled more societally, and that's been robbed from us. Any type of saying of, like, hey, but it used to be, if a woman was a single mom, it was, well, yeah, she's a single mom, stay away from her, she's made bad choices in life. Now it's, oh, well, I didn't plan on being a single mom, I didn't set out to do this. It's like me saying, well, I didn't plan to be a fat ass, I just ate 20 cinnamon rolls a day. So
You're right. It's just continuing this trend of switching accountability on all levels to men in areas that they can't even control,
Right.
And so men that don't realize these things subconsciously, they're overwhelmed. It's like, oh my gosh, everything is on my shoulders. Not only am I having to work, not only am I doing this, yes, trying to fit in and keep all these plates spinning, you're even accountable for, what women are doing and rescuing them in certain situations, and
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Men are certainly stuck in this old paradigm, of I think it's Bill Burr who said something like, the comedian who said something like, you'll never find a feminist in a burning building or a sinking ship or a hostage situation. And and I can even relate a funny story where, like, very vivid kind of thing. It was a girl that I was dating, and was at my place, and we were having this discussion, and it wasn't anything that um, I would say was all that big of a deal. And then all of a sudden, she just flips out on me and starts saying, you're hard headed, and you're just, I mean, this is somebody who didn't know my dad, and she just says, you're just like your dad. And I was like, excuse me. I said, you're out of line. I was like, okay, you need to leave. So the girl's like, you telling me to go? You telling me to go? And I said, I'm asking you right now. And she starts screaming, and I'm like, just calm down. So then she pushes me, and I go, is there a and I'm not a small guy, but I mean, like, I kind of say this to illustrate the point. I'm like about 6'1", about 220. I'm a good sized guy, and I'm like, is there a reason you're pushing me right now? And then she's like, well, you want me to leave? If I leave, that's the last time you're going to see me. I go, then leave.
Then
And
I've
so,
given this order. Yeah.
Pardon?
Yeah, then I've given you this order. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the next thing he did is she walks away. Still hasn't left yet. I turn on my phone. I figure, okay, I'm recording this. Because the last thing you need is to hear the neighbors, like the neighbors hear a screaming woman, and they think, of course, I'm the one who's initiated anything. At this point, I laid a hand on her. I said, okay. I said, well, you ready to leave? So we started. I said, why? And I wanted to repeat this on video. So I said, why are you pushing me right now? And of course, I just had my phone in my hand. And she starts talking. She goes, that was wrong. I said, okay, I just want you to know, that's not cool. Like, you can't push people. At no point was it acceptable for you to put your hands on somebody. I said, because I didn't do it to you. Next thing you know, she just realizes that she's being recorded. She goes, are you recording me? I go, absolutely, I am. And she flips out. I mean, it flips out, screaming, calling me an a-hole. And then she runs into my bathroom. I'm thinking, oh gosh, okay, here we go. Well, the next thing you know, she comes out screaming, like blood-curdling scream, holding her hand. I didn't even realize it. I thought she just slammed the door. But she had punched my linen closet and split her hand open.
Jeez.
She's like bleeding all over the floor, and I'm going, oh shit! Like, here we go. Like,
I'm gonna sprint away.
but you know what? The first thing that comes out of her mouth is, "Please help me." And I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, yeah, you're bleeding on my floor, so let's just like clean this up. Let's get under control. I'm like, all right, here, just put pressure on here. Blah blah blah. Clean everything up. And I was like, all right. So, of course, I'm still recording this, but like, I'm just thinking to myself, of course, when it comes to that, when push comes to shove, when the rubber meets the road, right. what's the message you're getting here? Yeah, I want to be tough. I want to do all these other things. Again, no actualization of the consequences. And I'm not saying that there aren't men who just completely shit the bed on this, but
right.
when they are like this, other men look at them and go, dude, you lost your shit, and you're like out of line. But
right.
when women do it, there's this acceptance, like, oh, well, the guy must have said something to push her to that point. Nobody ever says, when people used to say that about a man who was abusive, it's like, okay, well, you're a misogynist. So right. And I always say a misogynist. The definition of a misogynist, at least this is mine, is a man who's as judgmental as every woman that's out there. So, you walk into any place, a public place, and every woman sizes you up. So right. It's not, and they've already passed their judgments on you. So it's like, if a man does it, he's a misogynist, right? I mean, but
it's the unparalleled. There's no parallel standards. It's really, no, it's a good. That story is a really good microcosm of, I guess, just another representation of, like, I think it was what Tom Likas or one of them was saying about, being in a burning house. And the thing is, there's so many, a burning house, and then finally needing your help as a man. And the thing is, like you said, things have been removed in society that have that have kept women in check in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
But now, alternatively, there have things been added that, they don't, whether it's the government, whether it's, even preferential treatment I've seen in classes and in workplaces, and in forgiving speech a lot quicker than speech would be completely censored for men in different settings. So
Okay.
there's so many things for them to fall back on that the man is is just kind of this pawn that they can choose to use or choose not to a lot of the time even.
Well, yeah, that's a very good point. As a matter of fact, I've got something very relevant today. As a matter of fact, I was talking with, I work for a fairly big company,
Mhm.
and I was talking with one of my colleagues from a different department, but somebody that we have a lot of interdepartmental, interaction with, and she said something like, about how long she'd been working there, and she goes, I was flipping through my phone. She goes, and I saw that I had an old picture of you from like about 2 years ago. I was like, really? She goes, yeah. And I go, gosh, I don't remember. I'm thinking to myself, when did I take a picture with you? And she goes, oh yeah, I found it. And it's like, I go, well, let me see it. So she sends me the picture, or she shows me the picture, and it was me standing there, and I like had my hands on my hips, I was turning away, and it was basically of my ass. Um, and I go, so you're taking a picture of my ass? She goes, well, I came from a different type of environment, and the environment that I was in before, you just didn't have men that were, put together and, looked good and worked out and those kinds of things. And I go, so should I add this to my hashtag me too? Like, she's like, no, I was like, well, I go, and honestly, am I sitting here losing sleep over it? No, but I also know that there's a lot of women out there that, like, I mean, do I really think that Rose McGowan for the last X amount of years has been losing all this sleep over Harvey Weinstein, or did she just jump on it now because she's
It's
irrelevant?
relevant.
You know,
Mhm.
yeah, she's irrelevant. It's relevant, and she's irrelevant, and she wants to attach herself to it.
Magic combo.
Yeah. So it seems like perfect opportunity for her. But yeah, so on my end of things, I'm just going, like, where else in a social environment, in a work environment, would you get away with this? Like, if it were the other way around, and I'm not saying that there aren't guys who are sleazeballs and guys who do dumb shit, and that's not true. I just don't think you know you look at the perception of the overall perception is that yeah, well, it's men that are the predators, and the men are always the ones talking about this, and it's just like, when you've actually been let into some of these, if you I don't want to say that you infiltrate them, but when you actually get, maybe around girls, when you're the one not drinking and they're the ones that are, you understand. Yeah, I mean, the things that they say are way more vulgar. They're certainly more judgmental than any of the things that the guys say. I
Mhm.
had this conversation with a friend of mine not too long ago, where I said something about, and she happens to be a single mom, and I was like, well, I mean, I'm not dating any single moms, and she's just like, we went through this whole thing, and I said, well, do you think men and women are attracted to different things? And she said, well, yeah, I say in most cases. And I said, okay, well, let's just say that that's a yes. And so, so for example, I said, so I went through the whole thing. I said, why would I want to like raise somebody else's kids? Or I said, let's look at it this way. I said, men are attracted to, in general, at least the first thing, or one of the more important things than it is to women, is physical attractiveness in a woman. I
Mhm.
said, generally speaking, women who have had kids don't look as good. I said
Right.
it's a difference if they were my kids and you sacrificed your body for me, but in this case you've done it for somebody else, so why would I care? And
Exactly.
so what you're saying is, she made a mistake. She made a mistake, and you just can't be this forgiving. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. What if you knew a guy who in his late teens, early 20s had committed a felony? And let's say he tried to rob a bank. And then he turned around and said,
He turned his life around, came out of prison and said, you know what, I'm going to bust my ass. I'm going to be a hard worker. I said, but, his opportunities are limited because he had committed a felony. But, let's say he busts his ass, works some overtime, and he's like a mechanic or something like that, or a painter or whatever the case is. He works a labor job, and the most he's going to make is like 60 grand a year. And she goes, I said, would you consider him as a guy that you date? And she goes, well, no. And I go, well, why not? And she goes, well, if he's only making that much money, it says something about him as a person. I go, well, you mean he didn't just make a mistake? I mean, so,
Right.
so when we talk about hardwiring and consequences, that's one of those things. It's like, you have to understand that, like, if women, when I was growing up, it's like women would always say, well, we can have babies and you can't. It's like, yeah, but obviously you seem to be pretty flippant with this thing that you have over us. You can do something that we can't, but you seem to burden us with it. You know what I mean? It's not
Right.
It's
Well,
if it's such a talent, why do you throw it out there so much?
right. And the other thing is, it's almost, feminism has done this where it's removed. There's even some infighting within women in feminism where women are shamed for having kids, a lot of the time, for the sake of men. And it's like, well, if you're using this as your asset, but now you're shaming within for actually utilizing it, like, I don't understand. It's once again, it's picking and choosing the context to ascribe value to something, and then it renders it useless, ultimately, in argument form.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it goes back to kind of like the scarcity principle. It's like, if you're throwing it around, or even when it comes down to like, the value of sex in that sense is that, if you're just throwing around and, you've had a bunch of Chad run through you, then it's like, okay, well, if I look at some of these turds, like, why do I don't want to be the next turd. And I certainly don't want to be this guy that's going to be like, okay, I'm going to be the guy who changes her opinion about men. It's like, no, that's not the way it works.
That's how you die.
Pardon? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's how you get exhausted and worn out and essentially get destroyed. Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I had a good friend of mine who, when I was overseas, allegedly and this girl's a local national. So, I mean, this sheds a little bit of light, for the guys who are like, oh, well, hey, there's women out there in other countries. I mean, this was a country where, they weren't particularly rich. And there was a girl that was working. I wasn't in the military, but I worked as a contractor overseas. And one of the guys that I worked with had been interested in this girl. And it was like, I said, hey, be careful, because she's still married. I'm just telling you, just for your sake, just proceed cautiously. And she had previously been interested in another guy that we worked with. And so he was like, I just want to show her what it's like, I'm not going to commit to her. I just want to show her what it's like to be with a good man and all this other stuff. I'm like, hey, if that's your shtick, dude, then, you're my friend still, but, do what you got to do. And so, he was with her and for a little while. And then what ends up happening, she ends up sleeping with this other guy that we worked with. And, this is the one thing I never understood. He was outraged. He was so pissed at the guy that we worked with. Now, I can understand sort of in his situation only because he knew the guy. But the one thing is I don't understand is why, so many of us guys, when I say us guys, I can't relate, but why they get pissed off at the other guy. And I go, well, like, unless it's your brother or like your best friend, I mean, right. You get so mad at all these other guys, like as if somehow the woman had no choice in this.
Right. Yeah, there's no decision-making power, at all, but apparently there is, according to the feminist narrative, and and
right. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Chasing Amy.
No.
So it's Kevin Smith movie, the guy who wrote Clerks.
Yeah.
But there's a pretty brilliant scene in it. It's probably for the other reasons, but I mean, essentially, what the whole story is, woman, Ben Affleck's in it. She tells Ben Affleck that, she's a lesbian. She's never been with a guy, but she slept with a bunch of women. And then of course they fall in love. They have a relationship. And then of course through the grapevine, he finds out that she was a total skank when she was in high school, and slept with a bunch of guys. So he calls her out on it, and they have this huge argument. And he says, in one of the things that he referenced was about how she got nailed by two guys at one time. And of course, he says, those two guys, effing used you. And she goes, no, you don't get it. I use them. And it's like, well, wait a second, kind of getting back to some of these, they don't want any culpability. They want to go back and say, yeah, a guy treated me like shit. And they want this white knight response from guys, when it's on the one hand, but then, yeah, like you say, then feminism will tell you they have all this decision-making choices on the other hand too. She
Double
used
talk.
them. Yeah. Right. Exactly. I mean, it's so clear and obvious that that's exactly what it is. It's just as if too, like when a woman is interested in you, if you're interested in another woman, she's always a slut. She's always a slut because, she can come up with any sort of rationale, and you can say, well, why is she a slut? And she said, well, she slept with like two guys in like the same week. And you'd be like, well, wait a second, didn't you tell me one time? And she'll get indignant and be like, well, first of all, I don't appreciate you talking to me about that. And secondly, and I say this is a joke, this is a hypothetical, but of course it's true. It rings true because they'll say something like, yeah, and it was different because, we all had our socks on. I mean, they always come up with some cheesy rationale as to why what they did wasn't slutty, but with what everybody else did, they're all about perception in that way.
It ultimately is, those things are only used when I think shame is involved, and they will, and especially shame is very much a social thing. Shame is socially created. It's the level of shame is based off of social mores and and things like that. And so because that weighs so heavily on women, that double talk does arise, because it only comes out in those moments of shame, and where they do realize they've been cornered a lot of the time, and then they use double talk as a way to, it's perceived to be this intelligent comeback, but it truly doesn't have that effect.
Right. Well, yeah, I think especially the self-actualized man is like, it's like, listen, don't, and that's, kind of a generalized message to a lot of the guys out there. It's like, don't take that crap. I mean, that's, get back to the rational mind, get back to the male mind, and realize, all this stuff too. It's just like, when in the current narrative, it's always about like, oh, well, why is it a man can go out and sleep with a bunch of women, and when a woman does it, she's a slut. It's like, well, there's probably a number of different reasons, but it's probably along the same lines as why, a woman can walk into a marriage with $50,000 worth of debt, or any of these kinds of things. Or a woman, I don't call my women friends when I want to move furniture. I mean, there's, we can talk about it, or the women don't call their women friends when they want to move furniture. And it's not just about that. I mean, they don't call their women friends when they need a lot of things. So there's sexual dimorphism is a real thing, and everybody knows that it is. It's just somehow we've tried to, and this is essentially what Mgtow is about, is that it's sort of the it's the liberation on the other end. Women had their women's lib, supposedly, and I almost want to put lib in quotes, because they didn't have it bad before. I think it's just they let or however it came about. It doesn't really matter. I think just the point is where we're at now. And I think this is the liberation from the other end. Eventually when the scales tipped on the one end, things had to follow, find an equilibrium, and they had to, get to a point where,
right.
Men just realized, okay, well, wait a second, like, why the F am I still doing this shit?
Right.
So,
yeah. And I see Mgtow as very much, a world within the scope of a world like our own homeostasis. Everything tries to find equilibrium naturally. Our bodies do. We sweat to cool off our bodies when we're working out, whatever it is. And Mgtow, like socially and across the world, and I mean the people that are affected, it is that trying to find that balance again, because something doesn't exist or emerge unless there is a force behind it, and that has been feminism, that has been postmodernism, and so many of those things. Yeah.
Certainly.
I just put a comment in the live chat for people's questions.
Sure.
So we're going to start to take a couple of those real quick.
Sounds good.
First one is, looks like,
why are you gay? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, let's go to that. Greg, what do you think is a potential tipping point, more than women just hitting the wall, to cause a societal change? So I think he's trying to say, what do you think is, I'm assuming maybe for a tipping point for Mgtow to maybe spread more, or for men to go Mgtow? I'm not sure, either one, I guess.
Well, yeah, I mean, so yeah, so let me attempt to answer that question the best, but I think, honestly, like, I guess, when you say a tipping point, and maybe it's relatable to like I said, the first video that really got me hooked was that older women expired lottery tickets. Yeah, I mean, women hitting the wall. Think about it, like, and if you watch the video, of course, you'll see he puts it in such a way that it's like, okay, how conveniently that now you just want, like, now you want this stable family, now you want these relationships, now you want all those things. And I remember reading, I think, a comment where somebody said, coming from the voice of a woman, where she says, I can't find any nice guys, and you say, and the guy says, response, well, sure, I know where you left them, they're all in your 20s. And essentially, then the guys just kind of come around to it and go, okay, well, why? Yeah, the interesting thing is there was sort of more of a the shift, I guess, in the paradigm, or the paradigms were shifting, but now I'd say that the paradigm is really fully shifted, and I think at this point, as far as a tipping point, I mean, I gotta say we're already there. I can't see what else, like, I would say, like, you kind of, what more would you want? You look at, you look at the guys who've just been destroyed by divorce. You look at the people in the work environment who, you give a woman any amount of power, and of course she's just walks around like a little big man, abusing it to no end. I mean, the example I even cited about the woman taking a picture of my ass and then showing it to me, and of course they think it's funny. And on the flip side of things, it's like, I guess I don't know. I'd almost kind of look at it like, what more do we want? I mean, what more do you want just to say? But I think, honestly, and again, moving towards something, not moving away from something, moving towards it, I think it's just, look at how much freedom you'd have. I mean,
Yep,
look at it in that
that's the
way.
main
Look at
thing.
how much, at how much freedom you've had. Look at how much, a better you, whatever that you is going to be. Look at how much better you can be. Look at how much more money you can have. Look at the places that you can go visit.
Yep.
The experiences that you can have. And also the camaraderie, the friendships that you can have. I mean, I've got wonderful friendships, wonderful family relationships, and a lot of those things aren't possible. When you've got the proverbial old ball and chain, shackling you down.
That's the thing right there. And I got a question in the live chat as well about the end game of Mgtow. And so all those things, obviously you cannot forecast the end game for everybody. And I realized that when I was having a conversation the other day about Mgtow, and it's, the breadth of people that are coming to Mgtow. Obviously I mentioned 13-year-olds all the way to some men maybe are 50s and 60s, and they're in one stage of life. And so there's so many ideas of what that end game is, but I think that we can all agree that more freedom is good. that more opportunity to reach your goals is good, because we've seen these a lot of the last couple generations, for years, just so many people jaded about being a slave to something, and being a slave to debts and to other people. And the end game it is all of those things. And I look back in my life when just a couple years ago, I would never be able to invest the time into something like making this channel and responding to comments, if you had another woman. And so you have to weigh the cost benefit analysis there. What is it do you think really is going to provide fulfillment long term? And I
Right.
think, yeah.
And I'm glad you brought up that term, cost benefit analysis. I was actually going to kind of interject something, is, whereas a lot of people say, well, sure, it's always been that way. You always would have had more freedoms if you didn't have kids, didn't get married, and all those kinds of things. The only difference is that, there was at one time, is social mores and of course laws were different, in the past. There was some, you might have been relinquishing some freedom, but you were getting something back, in the form of like raising kids and things like that. But of course, the dynamic has changed. Sure, you can have kids, but let's say even the ability to raise them and do those kinds of things. There's so many of those things have changed. So it's you were always relinquishing freedom, but you were always kind of getting something back. But in this case, you're just only relinquishing freedom. That's all you're doing. You're only giving up some of your personal freedoms, and it's becoming, it's just like this ever encroaching kind of thing, where it's, it just keeps taking more and more and more. It's not like it's, you're really getting any benefit back.
Yeah, and that's where self-reflection takes some time. And I think that we, especially in Western culture, we are it's a very expedited life, especially America. The pace of life is very quick. You go from high school, you go to maybe college or a job, and you are, you don't really, unless you make an effort, you don't have time to sit down and think about what the best choice is. And so you're going to follow a pre-programmed path just for simplicity's sake. It's like having a prepackaged meal for you, if instead of actually being able to make it from scratch. And so as a result, you end up getting in situations that you don't want to be in later in life, whatever it looks like. And so I think that's kind of our overall long answer. And the thing is, the cost benefit analysis changes. The how much you weigh things does change throughout your life too. So that's always important to keep that in mind. All right, so another question. Let's see here. I kind of on this topic, so I'm just going to go with it. Tulio, what would your advice be to 20-year-olds in 3 sentences? With
3
women?
sentences.
Yeah.
He's probably capping me because he knows how much I can rabble on. So it's funny because I actually jotted down a few notes too. So let's just say, yeah, if I were to give advice to young 20-year-olds, I keep it simple. Invest in yourself, whatever that's going to be. Don't sacrifice your health. And, so when I say invest in yourself, one of those things should be your health and well-being. And then the third is live economically and save. Don't, think long-term, think in the long term. I started an IRA when I was 21 years old. That was by the advice of my Mgtow uncle. So, red pill uncle, if you want to call him that. So yeah, those would be my things. Invest in yourself, live economically and save, and don't sacrifice your health. Those would be probably, if I wanted to keep it very simple.
Yeah. Really nothing more to add there. Personally, with women, he also extended a question. I also got a question: Am I planning to go monk or to keep my foot in the pool still, so to speak? So if you wanted to add that answer, I don't know.
So gosh,
You
And
know,
so many varying perspectives throughout Mgtow on that.
yeah, you know, and I'd say at this point right now, like, you know, like TFM pushes the idea of, like, you know, having the dolls, like, and I don't know if that's for me or not. I don't think so. At least, you know, whatever. I'm not saying I couldn't change my mind. It just doesn't seem like it's for me. And I'm not knocking, because people have asked me, like, what do you think of that kind of stuff? Because, you know, I saw a documentary about them, and I said, it's not for me, but I don't blame guys for using them. Um,
Right.
Gosh, you know, that's another one that, you know, again, I don't know if I'm I know that there's guys out there that go with the monk lifestyle. You know, I certainly sometimes wish I could.
Hmm.
I don't know if it's just, you know, in a sense, just weaning off of a drug, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Hmm.
You know, but I'll tell you this much. Um, I've been with a fair amount of women, and I wouldn't
Hmm.
say that, you know, from one to the next, it's not all that much different. So take
Right.
that as you will. You know, I would say that, when you say keeping your foot in the pool, uh, I would just keep your toes in there. Don't keep your whole foot, you know, don't immerse yourself too much. Just, you know, but always remember some of, like, Tom Likas's advice, you know,
Right.
when it comes to, like, actually, you know, dipping your foot into the pool, so to speak, is, you know, always protect yourself. You know, if I can put it to you that plainly.
Yeah, do what general advice, do whatever you need to do to protect yourself, both for impending, just protect your identity, protect yourself, protect your life, but just anything in the future. You never know what tumult life's going to throw at you. So use your youth to prepare for those potential things, whether it's a family member that gets ill, whether it's you that get ill, whether it's losing a job. You know, this is where MGTOW really benefits young men as well,
Right.
is where it gives them a chance to get a leg up potentially on those future situations. You know, so that's kind of what I would say as well. Also, I'm not um, personally, I'm not keeping my foot in the pool right now. I'm not really planning on going that. I'm kind of a serial monogamist with my past, at least. So I'm not really a pumping up subscriber. So that's my response there.
Mhm.
And then the next one, let's move on. A couple more real quick before we close it up. Um, I think we got one. This one is kind of a tough question for me. I don't have a great background on it. I think I'm trying to find it here. It has to do generally with the courts and what turned the courts towards whether it's okay. How did the divorce court get this lopsided? And he also mentions no fault divorce a little bit further. So yeah.
Well, my assumption would just, you know, and this is a guess, but I think it's a fairly good guess. But yeah, I don't have a lot of historical references to point to. The only thing I would say is that, you know, ever since women have had the right to vote, you know, they're greater than 50% of the electorate, right? And you know, and unfortunately too, then you have, a lot of manginas out there too that are you know, and kind of the virtue signaling white knights that think, well, first of all, for starters, the divorce courts, as far as initially the idea was, this much I do know, was because you had single income households, and you had, you know, a woman who was only a homemaker. So
Hmm.
that idea was only, you know, like, it kind of came into play only during the time of, you know, gosh, in the whatever, the early 1900s, you know, before women were really much in the workforce. Um, but I'd say that the reason that they become this lopsided was because, of course, they're reflecting more of the gynocentric, um, uh, you know, to simply put it, more of the gynocentric mindset, and then also additionally because, you know, women are the majority of the electorate, so they
Hmm.
push, and they have coalitions, and they have, um, uh, you know what the word I'm looking for, but they have different groups, advocacy groups is the word I'm looking for, you know, to push these kinds of things. So, you know, and of course the idea of, you know, the white knighting and always looking at women as being the victims, certainly plays into the mindset of how the courts, I think, got to be that way. But I definitely think it has to do with the women's voting power. I'm sure that that's a big driving force. It's kind of the sledgehammer behind it.
Yeah. no fault divorce. I'm gonna touch on that real quick. I think that it has to do more even past the legal level. I think it has to do with a decline in, once again, accountability and a decline in this value of character and honor and staying with something. Reason, obviously there are reasons to get divorced, but for, when things like you see, marriages decline for sake of boredom, so to speak, and no fault divorce essentially has emerged because people want an easy way out, and it's kind of a metaphor for how they view life. People are not willing to commit to many things because they don't know what to commit to, and they want to give themselves more time to commit to something and hope that it sticks in their life. So it's kind of like more of a personal value system thing. But also, my father has worked in the court system for about 40 years, and he sees a mass exodus of men being, in the court field and the system and legal system. And he has had many female supervisors, judges. It's a field that's becoming dominated by women. And I think that there's probably some hiring preferences for them now.
Yeah, that's something I hadn't considered, because I mean, largely, obviously the courts, they're governmental jobs, right? So what's, where do you find more impact as far as the hiring preferences is certainly going to be towards women. So yeah, you're going to see that bias for sure.
Right. Got another one real quick from Rev. 20-piece question for both of us. Have you shared your Mgtow beliefs with any of your offline friends or family? If so, what are their thoughts? So I think it's kind of a twofold question. Shared your Mgtow beliefs with the Mgtow tag, or just your beliefs and not having to reveal that it's Mgtow, I guess. So yeah.
No, as far as I've gone, I've gone full on to say, yeah, it's like, I mean, it depends. Like, am I at work saying it? No. I mean, of course, there's a few people that I work with that I might espouse my views that are, that are obviously Mgtow, but I may not reference Mgtow. But in social circles, I have absolutely. I've mentioned that, and and people are like, oh, this sounds like a cult. This sounds like a cult. And I was like, well, it's so, I said, a cult has, a definitive leader and a definitive, those kids, like they're again, it's kind of like, look at what the hallmarks of a cult are, and then you'll realize it's not, because I don't know who the leader is, and I certainly don't care, because the idea of going your own way is the idea of independence amongst yourself. So you're your own leader in that sense.
Yeah,
so
I very much agree with that final statement, that it's everyone is pursuing self-actualization, and Mgtow is the easiest way to get there. It's just Mgtow community is a sounding board for little adjustments, little insights, little reminders, encouragement, new ways of seeing something. That's kind of how I do it. Yep. So, and next, I have told my immediate family. They know it because, if they're trying to reach me, or I'm always working on something, for the sake of it, I let them know that this is what I'm doing. They know about it. I don't let I know I have one of my college teammates that played baseball. He knows about it, but that's the only person outside of my family that knows my involvement with it. They personally, they're fine with it. I haven't really got any blowback from my family. And I think the best argument for the fact is just continually to enjoy your life. If you enjoy your life, what can people say? So
yeah, let that be your proof. At some point you're going to get argued out. There's going to be, and that's why you go your own way. It's because you walk away from the subjectivism and the that kind of bullshit. So it's like, okay, well, and I'll just let my final breath be the judge, in a sense. I'll just go through that my whole life, and I'm going to be happy. And if you want to argue against that, then hey, go for it.
Yeah, let your fruits speak for themselves. So just remember that. All right, so I got another one. I'm trying to move through these real quickly.
Sure.
I'm in my final year of high school. My parents are pushing me to go to college. Should I or not? Because I do want to further my education, but I do understand the risks. So if you
Oof.
want to tackle that.
Yeah, I mean, here, let me just throw out a few options.
Mhm.
Because I don't want to say, hey, do this, do that. Again, because you're going your own way, but it depends on what you want to do with your life. I mean, of course, you don't have to decide at this point. You're a young man. I would say, in one sense, though, one thing that I don't want to dismiss, look into the possibility of some form of a trade work. I would just say don't dismiss it, because there's good money to be made there, and obviously there's good skills to be picked up, and also we're seeing a resurgence of those types of trades work. There's a need for it. Whether it's ironworking or carpentry and those things. I mean, and don't get me wrong. I mean, those it's hard work, but but there's a lot of good paying jobs that revolve around those things, and you can always, sometimes in some cases, you might be part of a union. You can use that to further your education. A lot of times they'll do things like tuition reimbursement and whatnot. So I would just say don't dismiss that. Look at that as an option, as a possibility. It's not something I do. I have a college education. I'm in more of a salaried position. So yeah, I think I would just keep that open as an option. But yeah, as far as, going to college, yeah, there's definitely some pitfalls, especially with the student loans, and of course there's a lot of consideration. So unfortunately, I probably can't give you the best answer right now, without knowing the totality of the situation. But that's kind of my general advice. Don't dismiss any of those options that are out there, and definitely think about the idea of possibility of trades work too. I mean, some of that stuff is really good, and you can make a very good living off of it too, with good benefits and whatnot. So and I see a growing need in industry for it.
Yeah, so essentially any answer is not black and white. It's very much gray a lot of the time. So that's kind of how I take this one. I get this question a lot from potential men going to college or going back to college. And so
Mm-hmm.
the things you have to take into consideration are, where are your skills? What are the options for you in pursuing college?
Mm-hmm.
And are there any routes in reducing the cost? And so if you plan to live a minimalist lifestyle, if Mgtow offers that option, the demand to go to college and to get a high paying job is going to decrease. The thing that you have to understand is, how much do you value doing a certain job? If that self actualization from that job
Right.
is at a level that you must do it, then I would recommend being more open to paying money, but realize you have to cut other things out. The thing that's important to realize is there are so many options to reduce the cost of college, and that the college that you go to is not nearly as valuable as what you do with it. So you can go to Joe Schmo University
Mm-hmm.
and get that degree and really be on the same level as a lot of people that end up with an Ivy League degree. That's just if you take advantage of internships and you're smart with your
Good
money
point.
and you get networking. So I would recommend, hey, go to community college for 2 years, stay at home, work going into your final 2 years, and choose a cheap state school nearby, or maybe you have some scholarships, and you can get your degree and only expend maybe $10,000, and be set with your bachelor's and never have to look back, all the while just developing other skills. And then for grad school, if you need to go there, you wouldn't believe the number of grad
Right.
assistantships that are offered
And
that you
grants
can
and
get
things.
in
Yep.
completely free. So just keep that in mind.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's great advice. Definitely the 2 years at a CC is really, it's one
Mhm.
thing I wish I would have done, even if I could have asked my dad, hey, you want
Me
to just
too.
give me the cash
Mhm.
for the difference that'll save you. So, but
Right.
yeah, definitely advisable.
Yeah, so many options that are definitely bypassed. All right, so sorry for a lot of people that have asked questions. We're going to answer 2 more, but if I don't get to yours, maybe go ahead and email me or something like that. But
Sure.
so let's see here. I think one is in regards to Japan. I jotted it down. It was a while ago. What do you think it'll take, essentially? I'm going to try to summarize it, for Western society to become more like Japan and for men to walk away? I don't know if necessarily that's true in full, but I've heard that theory that some of
Yeah,
men
the meat eater and that. Yeah, I know a little bit of things that I've heard about it, but having not been to Japan, it's hard to say.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
and of course you're comparing very, very different cultures too. But I will say this much: I know that there's a high, association with, as far as culturally, like with, especially with male shame in Japan. So much that high suicide rates and things like
suicide
that.
force, right?
Pardon? Hello?
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry, go on.
No, but I was saying is that, like high suicide rates and things like that. So, for them to obviously kind of be walking away, if that is the case, yeah, gosh, I guess I don't know all the circumstances, but I mean, at least as it is in Western society, look at other Western cultures too. Like in the UK, like they're talking about catcalling and stuff like that, and making it illegal, and Australia, and some of these other westernized countries. I mean, yeah, I don't know. For me, I know that I have enough. I'm just hoping, that, and it seems that way, that a lot of people are just, and a wholesale thing. Gosh, I don't know. I don't know that it'll ever happen. I guess I don't know that I, entirely, care all that much. I just know that I've got my own single spark here, and I know that other people are doing the same thing, and hopefully what they'll see is, just because of a lot of men that walk away, they'll see how happy they are comparatively
Right.
in their own lives.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, just pay attention to who's doing well, who's not doing well, and what the patterns are,
right.
basically. Yeah, take that and run with it. So, I think we're gonna have time for one more. This is a joke question, but can women can women genetically engineer women to think more independently from the female hive mind and be less slutty? If so, is it worth it for men?
Oh wow. Can women genetically engineer
Genetically
women?
engineer women to think more independently from the female hive mind and be less slutty.
Oh gosh.
That's a real theoretical tough one right there. I think I'm
Yeah,
stumped.
that's some highbrow science kind of question. That's like, I don't know. Like, I'd almost expect Black Mirror. Maybe they can do an episode on that.
Yeah,
Who knows? Geez, yeah, I don't know. Good question. I'm stumped. So I didn't get the $1 million question, but yeah, I don't know. I know that somehow, for some reason, there's going to be a reason I won't get to sleep until like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I'll be thinking about that one. So it's giving me a good laugh. It's giving me a good laugh.
yeah. So, um, basically, they're huge proponents of of having hope behind genetic engineering. And if you do, then maybe there's hope for that. But I don't know if that's something I've really invested a lot of time in for my Mgtow journey so far. Uh, uh, um, yeah, so I'm just gonna scan these real quick, see if there are any outstanding questions that I want to get through real quick. I think another guy asked if my sister knows of my engagement with Mgtow, but she does not know I upload. One of them does know. Both of them know of my Mgtow involvement. Only one knows that I upload. Neither the one that so she's actually listened to a couple of my videos, and she's she hasn't really raised any issue or concern. She
Mhm.
knows I'm very outspoken about these things, so
Sure.
it's kind of just commonplace for her. But yeah, I think that sums up all the questions. I apologize if we missed any of your questions, guys. Once again, feel free to email me, and feel free to hit me up for future live streams. I'm willing to have anybody that wants to talk and feels comfortable on for a stream, as Greg joined, and I know a lot of people enjoyed having Greg on. So if you want him back too, hey, we can have him back at some point. So
Appreciate it.
yeah. So thanks for joining for about almost 2 hours, Greg.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Good insight, man. I appreciate for you reaching out in the first place to email me about
Yeah,
it.
likewise, man. It was fun, no doubt. Good to finally get you on the line. I know we bounced a few emails back and forth, but Yeah, I mean, it's certainly been it's been a good hoot, good fun. And now, like I said, I've got this genetically engineered question to sit here and just, bounce around in my mind. So
it's gonna be weighing on us. So if
yeah.
if I'm tweeting at like 4 a.m. tonight, guys, you know what's up.
All right, cool.
Thanks again, everybody. I will be hoping to have another stream later this week and next week for sure. If you got requests for people for me to get on for streams, let me know. Take care, everyone. Hoodies up.